I handed my dad the ultrasound photo across the dinner table. He didn't blink, didn't even hold it. He looked at it like it was a parking ticket, then looked up at me, and I swear, I saw it happen the instant his love for me switched off. "You've ruined everything," he said. His voice was flat, not angry worse. It was final, condemning, as if my pregnancy had wiped out every achievement I'd ever had. My degree, my job, my worth. I sat there, 6 weeks pregnant, still nauseous from morning sickness, while the man who raised me called me a failure for choosing to become a mother. And my mom. She sighed and said, "We can fix this. It's not too late." Like my baby was a mistake to erase, not a life to love. I pushed the plate aside and said, "You don't get to talk to me about responsibility, not when you walked away from yours the second I needed you." And when I stood up, shaking but steady, I said one last thing. If this baby ruins everything, then maybe everything wasn't worth saving. They didn't call me for weeks. But months later, when they showed up trying to play the proud grandparents, I reminded them, you don't get to love what you once called a disgrace. I'm Oliver. I told my parents I was pregnant, and they treated me like I died. But the truth, that was the day I finally came alive. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Say listening in the comments, or let me know where you're from. I love seeing how far this story can reach, and if it speaks to you, please subscribe. It helps more than you know. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. I was 24, working full-time as a software engineer in downtown Seattle. My life was predictable in the kind of way that made you feel safe, but quietly restless. I shared a one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill with my boyfriend Ethan. We'd been together for almost 3 years. Everyone thought we were solid. We looked good in pictures. We had a rhythm. But if I was being honest, there had been more silence between us lately than conversation. He worked in media, always. On deadline, always one more client call to take, always another after-hours event that couldn't wait. Still, I thought I knew him. I thought we were building towards something, maybe not marriage yet, but something real. I used to believe motherhood would come later, after the promotion, after the condo, after I felt sure that the person I loved would stay. Then I got sick. It started with a sinus infection. I took antibiotics, didn't think much of it. A week later, I realized I was 6 days late. I bought a test on the way home from work and waited until the next morning. My hands were shaking as I watched the lines appear, one and then another. Bold, red, unmistakable. 2 lines. Pregnant. I sat on the edge of the tub for what felt like hours. I was terrified, of course, but I was also still. Something inside me felt quiet, rooted. I pictured a small heartbeat, a life growing inside me that didn't ask for permission. It was unexpected, but it didn't feel wrong. I decided to tell my parents first. I called to invite them to dinner at their home in Bellevue, the house I grew up in. I told them I wanted to cook for them a rare offer that, to my surprise, they accepted. I went all out. Roasted chicken with rosemary garlic mashed potato salad with cranberries and pecans. I even brought non-alcoholic wine, hoping it would feel like a soft celebration, not a shock. I wore a navy dress my mom once bought me, trying to remind her that I was still hers. I waited until after the plates were cleared. I had rehearsed the words, made them simple and direct. "I'm pregnant," I said. My father, Richard, didn't even blink. He slammed his napkin down and barked, "You've ruined everything!" He stood towering, pacing behind his chair. "Your career, your life? Do you even realize what you're doing? This is reckless. You've made us a joke." And my mother, Linda, just sat there, eyes fixed on her empty wine glass. Not a word, not even a twitch in her brow. That silence, it cut deeper than his yelling. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just stood, collected my things, and left. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my car. My heart beat louder than the engine as I pulled away. I went straight home and told Ethan. He sat in silence for about 30 seconds, then looked away and said, "I can't do this." He confessed in the same breath that he was seeing someone else, Sarah, a 19-year-old intern at his office. "It's not that I don't care about you," he said. I never pictured being a dad. Not now." That night, he packed his bags and left. No drama, no tears. Just the sound of the front door clicking shut, like the last line of a book I never agreed to finish. I stood there alone, one hand on my stomach, the other against the wall, and I whispered to no one, "We're okay. We're still here." The apartment felt colder than it ever had. The heat was on, but it didn't matter. I sat in the living room with Ethan's leftover boxes stacked by the door, his favorite hoodie half folded on the armrest, his coffee mug still in the sink. Everything around me looked like before, but everything inside me was irreversibly after. I stared at the dark window until I couldn't hold it in anymore, then picked up my phone and called Sophie. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "I'm coming," and showed up 20 minutes later in pajamas and slippers, carrying takeout and 2 blankets. I didn't talk much. I didn't have to. She held me on the sofa as I finally cried. Not for Ethan, but for the child growing inside me, who just lost his entire future in one night. 2 days later, my father called. I thought naively that maybe he had reconsidered, that maybe he'd say he overreacted. "Be smart," he said. "You're not ready for this. There's still time to end it." I didn't answer. I couldn't. That evening, my mom texted, "I know this is emotional, but you need to think about your life, your job, your future. This isn't the time to be selfish." Selfish. That word felt like a punch to the stomach. I realized then I wasn't just going to raise this child alone. I was going to protect him from the very people who were supposed to protect me. Sophie came with me to my first prenatal appointment. When the doctor showed me the screen, I saw it tiny flickering. A heartbeat. I don't remember breathing. Just crying hard and ugly and real. Not from fear, but from certainty. I was keeping this baby. I left the apartment Ethan and I once shared. Found a studio in Fremont close to Sophie. Nothing fancy, just a bed, a microwave, and a table for 2. But it was mine. Ours. I bought a secondhand crib and repainted it seafoam green. I started reading everything books on single parenting, legal rights, budgeting. I made spreadsheets. I clipped coupons. I built a future one line at a time. While unpacking, I found a card Ethan had written me 2 birthdays ago. It said, "If you ever become a mom, I want to be the first to kiss your belly." I stared at the paper, my hands trembling, not from longing, but from the sting of how much people can lie while looking you in the eye. One night, exhausted from budgeting baby formula costs, I scrolled through Facebook and saw a comment on a mutual friend's post. Girls who have babies young just want government checks and attention. I closed the app, deleted my profile, then stood in the bathroom, stared at myself in the mirror. Puffy eyes, swollen belly, one trembling breath. And I said out loud, "I won't be your burden. I'll be my child's strength." It was the first promise I made to my son, and I intend to keep it. By the 8th month of my pregnancy, everything in my body felt heavier. My feet were swollen, my back constantly ached, and I barely slept more than 2 hours at a time. But every morning, I still logged into work. I told HR early on, and they kindly allowed me to work from home twice a week. But the projects didn't slow down. Neither did the expectations. I kept my pregnancy quiet with most of my coworkers, not out of shame, but because I was afraid of the looks that came after someone said, "You're so brave," when what they meant was, "Poor girl." I didn't want pity. I wanted to be enough. I spent my evenings sanding down a used crib I found online, painted it a soft mint green. There was something meditative in each brush stroke, like I was building more than furniture. I was building a place where someone would be safe. Each night, I'd sit in that tiny studio apartment in Fremont and read out loud to the bump beneath my ribs. I always ended with, "Guess how much I love you," even though my voice cracked every time I said the words. Sophie must have sensed I needed something more than paint and pages. One Saturday afternoon, she surprised me with a baby shower at her apartment. Nothing extravagant, just 4 close friends, a banner that said, "You've got this, Mama," and a homemade cake shaped like a star. I cried when I unwrapped the hand-knit blanket. Across the edge, stitched in soft blue, were the words, "Lucas, you are so loved." I had chosen the name Lucas a few weeks earlier after a late-night heartbeat check at the doctor's office. It just came to me. It felt strong, gentle, and somehow already his. That shower shifted something in me. For the first time, I didn't feel like a girl trying to survive something. I felt like a mother preparing for someone. I looked around the room and I saw more than support. I saw belief. I saw love that didn't ask me to apologize. Lucas arrived on a Tuesday. 19 hours of labor. Sophie stayed with me the entire time, holding my hand through every contraction, reading to me when I couldn't focus, rubbing my shoulders when I wanted to scream. And when the nurse placed Lucas on my chest, slick and screaming and perfect, I whispered, "We did it." I texted Ethan from the hospital. I told him his son had been born. He never replied. No flowers, no call, no visit. The room beside mine filled with laughter from a couple celebrating with their newborn. The husband cried when he held his daughter. My room was silent, but when I looked into Lucas's eyes, it wasn't empty. His gaze was new, but unshakable, like he was telling me, "I'm here. You're not alone." A week later, I received a small deposit in my bank account. It was from Ethan. No message, no explanation. The amount barely covered diapers for the month. Over the next few months, this deposits continued sporadic and inconsistent. Sometimes he claimed car trouble. Sometimes he didn't respond at all. He never asked for photos, never called. To me, Lucas was the center of the universe. To Ethan, he was a line item. When Lucas was 3 months old, my phone lit up with a call from a number I hadn't saved but instantly recognized. "Hi, sweetheart." My mother's voice came through lighter than I remembered. "I've been thinking about you. Are you okay?" I paused, uncertain how to answer. But before I could speak, she continued, "Your father wanted to know if you plan on coming back to Bellevue. And Ethan's going through a rough patch. Maybe you should talk to him." That call wasn't about me or Lucas. It was about Ethan. Their loyalty even now belonged to him. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding Lucas against my chest as he slept. I wondered if I was being cruel, cutting off my parents, refusing Ethan's half-hearted attempts. But then, Lucas stirred tiny fingers curling into my shirt, breathing deep and steady. And I remembered these people had chosen silence when I needed a voice. I couldn't give them the power to hurt him the way they had hurt me. Not again. By the time Lucas turned 4, he was a full force of curiosity and chaos. He was obsessed with space planets, stars, rockets. Every question started with, "Why?" and ended with, "Can we build one?" He had a habit of pointing at the sky and asking if Mars had moms too. One evening, as we were folding laundry, he looked up and asked, "Where's my dad?" I froze. I had practiced this conversation in my head for years, but never thought it would come out of a child so small. I answered gently, "Your dad wasn't ready to be a parent, but I was, and I'm always here." Lucas accepted that. But I saw something settle behind his eyes, something quiet, something I couldn't reach with logic or lullabies. It scared me. A few weeks later, during a kindergarten science fair, I met Michael. He was tall, soft-spoken with tired eyes and a calm voice. His daughter Ava had built a cardboard rocket, She and Lucas instantly became friends. Over the next few months, we started seeing each other. More playdates, coffee runs, late night texts about parenting mishaps. Michael was different. He didn't try to fix things. He just asked if I was okay. And when he noticed Lucas's bike had a broken pedal, he showed up the next day with tools and snacks. It felt easy, earned, real. One Saturday, Lucas had a soccer game at the park. I was on the sidelines cheering when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Lucas is pretty good. I turned and there he was. Ethan. Thinner eyes, sunken voice softer than I remembered. He said he had broken up with Sarah, was living with his parents, and was in therapy. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what he wanted. He did. He wanted to meet Lucas. I said yes, with supervision. At their first meeting, Lucas wore his team jersey and clutched his soccer ball like it was armor. "I'm fast," he told Ethan. "Watch me kick." Ethan brought a Lego soccer set. They sat on the grass and built it in silence. And as I watched, I saw at the tilt of Lucas's brow the shape of his smile. Ethan's features etched into my son. After the third visit, Ethan asked to try again. With me. He said he still loved me, that maybe we could rebuild for Lucas's sake. I said no. I told him I was seeing someone, that Lucas had a life, and I had one too, and neither included going backward. Then came my parents. They showed up at my door with toy smiles too wide, voices too sweet. They asked to take Lucas for a weekend in Bellevue. I stared at them, remembering the silence, the judgment, the callousness. "Where were you?" I asked when I was bleeding and alone. My father looked away. My mother said, "But everything's fine now. Can't we just be a family again?" I drew the line. Lucas isn't a way for you to fix your shame. He's not your redemption. They left without argument, but their absence didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy. Everything suddenly did. Ethan was trying to get closer. My parents were knocking on doors they once slammed shut. And Michael, he started pulling back. Quietly, but noticeably. The spark in his eyes dimmed when I mentioned Ethan. His silence felt like a question I didn't know how to answer. One night, I lay beside Lucas, watching him sleep, and wondered if I was doing the right thing. Was I protecting him? Or was I keeping him from truths he had the right to explore I didn't know? I just knew I couldn't afford to get this wrong. After a few supervised visits, Ethan began texting more frequently. At first, it was short and polite, asking how Lucas was doing, whether he could bring over a toy. Then, the messages changed. He said he needed alone time with his son, that my presence made it impossible for them to bond. He called it stifling. I called it necessary. I told him the truth. 3 visits did not erase 5 years of silence. I wasn't going to hand my child over to a stranger just because that stranger shared his DNA. Ethan didn't respond. He showed up to the next visit tense quiet. At the end, he left without saying goodbye to either of us. A few days later, I was at work when I received a call from Lucas's teacher. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the worry underneath. "There's a man here," she said. "He says he's Lucas's father and that he has permission to pick him up today." I left work immediately. When I arrived, Lucas was standing stiffly on the playground, his backpack dangling from one shoulder. Ethan was speaking to the teacher, gesturing with that smooth, self-assured charm he used to use on clients. He glanced at me when I walked up, his expression somewhere between wounded and smug. "I just wanted to surprise him," he said. "This isn't how you build trust," I replied. "It's how you break it." Lucas was quiet in the car ride home. Then, barely above a whisper, he asked, "Is that man really my dad? Why don't you let me go with him?" I didn't answer right away. I just reached back and took his hand. Some truths take longer than a red light to explain. That night, while checking Lucas's iPad, I noticed something unusual. A message notification popped up, one I didn't recognize. It was from an app designed for kids, a safe space for messaging. I opened it and froze. There were dozens of messages from my mother. Photos of me as a child, pictures of Ethan, captions that read, "This is your real family, and we miss you." I called her immediately. "You don't get to go behind my back," I said. "You don't get to feed my son some alternate version of reality because you can't accept the one you abandoned." She cried, said I was robbing them of their right to be grandparents. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. Later that week, Michael noticed the weight I was carrying. Over dinner, he looked at me and asked, "Are you sure you're not still in love with Ethan?" I shook my head. "Absolutely not." He didn't press, but I could tell something had shifted. One night, after Lucas proudly announced that his real dad built Lego sets better than cartoons, Michael went quiet. "I can't compete with blood," he said. The words stung not because they were cruel, but because I knew he believed them. The cracks were starting to show in places I thought were solid. Then the court papers arrived. Ethan had filed for joint custody. He claimed he had changed, had a stable job, now was in therapy, and deserved the chance to raise his son. I felt the breath leave my body as I read the pages. All the savings I had built, every dollar meant for a down payment on a house, would now go to legal fees. The pressure wrapped around me like a steel band. I took on freelance contracts at night. I worked through dinners collapsed on the couch with a laptop on my chest. Sometimes I fell asleep during Lucas's bedtime stories. More than once, he nudged me awake to finish the last page. The breaking point came during a school performance. Lucas was playing Jupiter in his class's solar system play. I was late, stuck on a work call. I slipped into the back of the room just as the children bowed. Lucas looked up, didn't see me at first, and burst into tears in front of everyone. That night, as I tucked him in, he asked, "Do you love work more than me?" I didn't answer. I just held in my throat tight with guilt I didn't know how to name. Maybe I had tried so hard to protect him from his father that I'd forgotten to protect him from the space I was leaving behind. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and tension. Ethan sat on the right, flanked by a sharply dressed lawyer. I sat on the left alone, with my attorney palm's sweaty throat dry. Between us was a table piled with folders, affidavits, bank statements, and memories I wished I didn't have to relive. Richard and Linda were seated behind Ethan, looking every bit the part of supportive parents. When they spoke, it was measured and firm. They said Ethan had matured, that every child deserved both parents, that Lucas would benefit from a more balanced upbringing. I stayed silent as long as I could. But when the judge asked if I wanted to speak, I stood. I said, Ethan didn't disappear because he was confused. He disappeared because he chose to. I told them about the nights Lucas cried with a fever, and I didn't know what to do. About the time I sold my favorite coat to cover a preschool deposit. About how Lucas asked if dads were real, or just something other kids had. I said it calmly. I didn't cry. But my voice trembled when I said, he was gone. And now he wants the rewards without the work. The court assigned Lucas to a child advocate, a counselor, who would meet with him privately and report back. A week later, the counselor submitted her findings. Lucas had said he felt nervous around Ethan, that he didn't understand why he suddenly wanted to be around, that he already had a dad, Michael. I read the report 3 times before it sank in. Lucas had chosen. Not with malice, not with manipulation, just with quiet honesty. At the next hearing, Michael showed up late, but steady. He didn't speak. He just handed the judge a folded letter. It was written in pencil crooked and a little smudged. Lucas had written, I want to live with Mom and Dad Michael. I don't want to be scared anymore. I covered my mouth with my hand and let the tears fall silently. The judge read the letter, looked at us, then delivered the ruling. Ethan's petition was denied. He was granted supervised visitation only with dates and times approved by me. Ethan didn't argue. He stood, nodded once in my direction, and left the room. I walked out, holding Lucas's hand. My heart was racing, not with fear, but with the weight of finally having done what I needed to do. That night, after Lucas went to bed, I sat outside with Michael. The air was cool, the sky clear. I leaned my head on his shoulder and whispered, I was so afraid I'd lose you, that this would break us. Michael opened a soda and handed it to me. I'm not going anywhere, he said. You didn't break anything. You held everything together. We agreed to start family counseling, not because we were broken, but because we wanted to get stronger, together, for all of us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally exhale. The morning after the court ruling, Michael and I sat side by side on the back porch sipping coffee as Lucas and Ava built towers with foam blocks in the grass. There was a quiet between us, not heavy, just full. I reached for his hand and broke the silence. There were moments, I said, when I truly thought I was failing. As a mother, as a partner. I was so wrapped up in surviving, I forgot to see how much I was asking of you. Michael didn't flinch. He just tightened his grip on my hand. I never needed you to be perfect, he said. I just needed you to be real. That night, we signed up for family therapy. Not because we were broken, but because we knew healing wasn't a finish line. It was a process, a shared one. And Lucas and Ava deserved to see us choosing each other again and again. A week later, I called my parents. I invited them over for a quiet Sunday afternoon. I wasn't planning to reopen old wounds, but I also wasn't letting them fester. They arrived with homemade cookies and nervous smiles. After tea, I sat them down and said, You're welcome in Lucas's life, but on my terms. No more secret messages, no more undermining. If you want a relationship with him, you come through me. If you can't do that, then it ends here. Richard was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at me, not with the cold calculation I remembered, but something older, wearier. I thought you weren't strong enough, he said. I was wrong. Linda wiped the corner of her eye and whispered, I let shame win over love. And I'm sorry. I didn't cry. I didn't hug them. But I nodded. Sometimes peace doesn't come with warmth. Sometimes it just means nobody's shouting anymore. To give Lucas something that belonged only to us, I planned a weekend camping trip. Just me and my son. We went to Olympic National Park, where the sky seemed to stretch wider than any past could reach. We pitched a tent, roasted marshmallows, and told each other stories under the stars. Lucas brought his old Lego soccer set and talked about Ethan with a strange calm. Do you wish you lived with your dad? I asked. He shook his head. No, I have you. And Dad Michael. I just want a house where no one yells. That night, I pulled out a small tin box I'd been keeping for years. Inside was a sonogram photo, his birth certificate, and a letter I'd written the night I found out I was pregnant. I read it aloud to him, my voice trembling in places. We called it our memory box. Lucas held it close and said, Let's add to it every time something makes us stronger. A few weeks later, I got an email from Ethan. It was short. I understand Lucas doesn't need me. But if he ever has questions, please let me be someone who can answer. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, because I wasn't. I just felt clean, like an old cabinet finally cleared of dust and locked with care. Sophie Ever the Lighthouse, in my storms, hosted a girls' night in. Just the two of us, a 90s playlist, strawberry ice cream, and her ancient couch. You're an incredible mom, she said between bites. But don't forget to be a ridiculous woman sometimes, too. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. And for the first time in a long time, I remembered I was never truly alone. We held the engagement party in our backyard, surrounded by string lights and hand-painted signs made by the kids. Sophie was my maid of honor. Ava twirled in a white dress, and Lucas wore a tiny navy suit with a wooden sign around his neck, Forever Family. Michael didn't give a speech. He didn't have to. He looked at me, got down on one knee, and said, Thank you for believing I could be part of your everything. I said yes. not because I needed saving, but because I had walked through the fire and chose this love freely with full eyes and a steady heart. We made plans to move. The old Ballard house had served us well, but it was time. We bought a place in Queen Anne, a 2-story craftsman with a big backyard, a climbing tree, and just enough room for chaos. "This will be the center of the universe," Lucas declared, pointing to a corner of the living room. Ava nodded solemnly. "And over here will be the pizza bakery." While painting Lucas's new bedroom, I scrawled in big letters on the inside of his closet wall, "This is where we start again." Ethan didn't disappear completely. On Lucas's birthdays, he sent small gifts, a telescope book, a tiny model of Saturn. I let Lucas decide what to do with them. Most times he asked me to open them with him. One year he said, "I like that he remembers me, but I love that you never forget me." My parents kept their distance, but showed up, not can be bar, for school recitals and Christmas brunch. They stayed polite, quiet, and most importantly, within the lines I'd drawn. I stopped waiting for them to change. I accepted what was possible and forgave what wasn't, not for them, but for my own peace. Lucas turned 6. He could read full sentences now, was obsessed with rockets and robots, and had memorized the entire soundtrack of The Martian. One evening near Christmas, we were decorating the tree when Lucas turned to Michael and said, "Dad, can you help me hang the star?" Michael froze for a beat. So did I. But Lucas had already moved on, holding up the star like it was the most natural request in the world. And in that moment, I knew we'd made it. Not to perfection, not to some picture frame fantasy, but to something real. I started writing. At first, it was just for me. Blog posts, half-finished thoughts, late-night ramblings about solo motherhood, and code deadlines. But they resonated. Emails came from women across the country, women who had been left, dismissed, underestimated. "You made me feel seen," one wrote. Like I wasn't a screw-up. Like maybe I could start again. And that's when I realized this story, my story, wasn't just mine. It belonged to every woman who had ever stood in a courtroom, a delivery room, or a dark room at 2 a.m. and whispered, "I can do this." One afternoon, I sat on our back porch again. Lucas and Ava were playing NASA versus Pizza Shop in the grass. Inside, I could hear Sophie laughing in the kitchen with Michael as they rolled out dough. The wind picked up, and I glanced at the garden wall where Lucas had written in chalk, "We are family, forever." I closed my eyes and breathed it in. Not perfect, not easy, but ours. And finally, beautifully, home. Sometimes family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up, stays, and loves you in the quiet, ordinary moments. Healing doesn't always look like a grand triumph. Often, it's just choosing peace over pride, love over legacy, and courage over silence. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll share your thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe and follow the channel for more true, heartfelt journeys like this. Thank you for being here,